Good morning and welcome to Broadband Breakfast Live Online for Monday, March 23rd. We are talking about broadband and the coronavirus. We appreciate everyone being on the call, being on our calls every day, Monday to Friday. We started this little over a week ago on March 13th, as we saw there's really just a need for people to gather to talk about what's going on with broadband and the coronavirus, how we can be a solution, the kinds of tools and resources that are available, the issues that are out there. Some things we've already talked about in a little over a week include education, the higher education kind of counseling and how that's going to work. We've talked about the bandwidth issues that ISPs are facing. We've talked about the FCC, what emergency measures they have taken. We've heard from FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr. We hope to hear from many more government and other state. In fact, we will hear today from two officials working with states and state broadband projects on some of the issues they're dealing with. Today, we're going to talk about free and low-cost broadband and some of the important issues that come from this digital divide question that's really crucial. So I just want to encourage you to continue to tune in every Monday to Friday at 12 noon Eastern time and go ahead and submit your questions in any of the streams, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook that you have, or you can tweet us at broadband, hashtag broadband. I'm going to put that on the screen here so you can see everyone, but go ahead and just tweet your questions to hashtag broadband and hopefully we'll be able to get them in. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and invite our guests in. We have Angela Seifer, who is the Executive Director of the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. Thank you so much, Angela, for all of your help in putting this together. We also have Harold Feld, who is the Senior Vice President at Public Knowledge, and Harold's a ubiquitous thinker on all broadband topics, but we're particularly interested in his thoughts about free and low-cost broadband, which he's recently written about. We also have Jeff Searle, how do you say it, Jeff? Oh, sorry, I got you mute there. Searle, okay, thank you, Jeff. Jeff is the director of the North Carolina Broadband Office, and one of the advantages and disadvantages of teleworking is sometimes little creatures come into your door. I gotta go, Pam. Great, keep kidding.
No worries. I have the same thing going on. We're about to have lunch, so you may hear that.
Right. Well, I should have brought the kitty in, right? Kitties and the internet, right? Great combination. And last but not least, we have Delano Squires, who's with the DC Connect office, and he'll tell us a little bit more about that. So we're going to go ahead and turn to Harold first. Tell us a little bit about Public Knowledge, just extremely briefly. Who is Public Knowledge? What's your role there? And tell us your thoughts about free and low-cost broadband.
Public Knowledge, thank you. Public Knowledge is a digital rights advocacy group. We've been around for about 20 years. We're based in Washington, D.C. One element of our advocacy is focused on trying to provide to everyone meaningful access to broadband and working with organizations such as Angela's to try to work on closing the digital divide. We are involved in a number of efforts to try to work with the FCC to expand what they can do, and with members of Congress to try to include in the various stimulus packages that are coming out policies that would help keep people connected during this crisis. I think everybody agrees that broadband has proven to be absolutely essential for all Americans, whether it's for education or to order groceries or to stay in touch with family or just to keep from being bored out of your mind while you're staying home. So we have proposed that as part of the stimulus package, that Congress should actually pay for everyone's broadband for the duration of the crisis, or 2-3 months, depending. We need to understand that this is not a a luxury thing. This is a necessity. We already have 18 million people in this country who simply cannot afford broadband. They have access but can't afford it, according to research by Pew. Excuse me. And this is a form of direct stimulus which can contribute enormously and relieve people who are now either losing their jobs or afraid of losing their jobs, or who will have temporary cash flow problems, who are worried about the cost of this lifeline. It's $50 we're proposing for everybody to have basic broadband, 25 down and 3 up, or whatever the closest package is that's provided by your broadband provider. So if you have a better package than that, more expensive, that would be a $50 credit to your bill. If you aren't connected, we would require the carrier to connect you for the duration. We would also require carriers to live up to the terms of the Keep America Connected pledge that many of them have signed on to now, which is no capacity caps on wireline connections, no fees or overages, and we would pay the $50 a month for this directly to the carriers. So it's essentially a way of making $50 become $100 in stimulus, because it's a $50 credit directly to the customer who doesn't have to pay it, and it's a $50 payment to the carrier to provide the service. So this is a win-win for everybody, and gives everybody in the United States who has access to broadband a necessary lifeline for the duration of the crisis.
Now, let me tease out 2 points there quickly before we open it a little broader. The first you sort of got to at the end, that is, this is distinct and different from the Keep Americans Connected pledge, right? And we talked a little bit about that last week, both with our panelist on Wednesday, and also with Commissioner Carr the next day. That is a commitment that many providers have made, and it's simply not to cut people off or charge late fees for 60 days. It has nothing to do with offering free or low-cost broadband, although there was a piece in there about Wi-Fi and allowing greater Wi-Fi access. So I guess I just want to make it clear that this is something new and not yet out there, but you're proposing. And the second point I wanted to make is, are you at all concerned that this are you thinking too big, I guess, is the question, right? I mean, there's a lot of concern that Congress was going to vote on something yesterday. It didn't happen because of concerns about it. From a time perspective, are we talking about something designed to help people immediately, or is this something to kind of pave the way so we don't have such significant problems in the future? So could you address those, Harold?
Well, sure. I mean, this would help people right away. I mean, we're talking about people who have gotten pink slips or who are knowing for sure they're going to get them. I talk to people, friends, and others all the time who are telling me they've been furloughed or, they're laid off. And this is broadband is something they absolutely need to stay in touch. It's something they absolutely need, and they don't know how they're going to pay for it next month. They don't have cash. They don't have their paycheck coming in, and it's not their fault. This takes that off the table. It gives them peace of mind. It makes sure that they will have an essential service, that they don't have to worry about it. It also helps the companies because we don't have to depend on companies. Many of them in rural areas in particular are small businesses where it's good if they can keep the pledge, but they're carrying the guys who can't pay, and it's good of them to step up. But we're talking about, we want to keep them afloat too. We want to keep everybody stimulated, and we want to keep the economy stimulated. And this is a form of, just directly putting money in everybody's pocket, putting money in the pockets of American employers in a very direct and simple fashion. And we estimate that if we did this on a per household basis, we'd be looking at about $6 billion a month, which in terms of the kind of stimulus that we're talking about for a limited period of time here, we think is very doable, very affordable, and in fact, a necessity in this crisis.
Great, great. No, thank you very much. Let me turn to Angela and ask for your reactions to this proposal and maybe other proposals out there to make sure that we're not stopping people from getting the access they need.
Yeah. So the big difference between the FCC's pledge and what Harold is talking about is that the FCC's pledge has to do with keeping people who already have access connected. And then Harold's talking about all those people that don't have access right now, right? So that's a big difference. Yes, we want everybody who has access to keep it, but we also need to get everybody who didn't have access. So the digital divide is now very much in everyone's face. We know from census that there are 18 million households that do not have a broadband subscription at home. 14 million of those 18 million are urban. So yes, there is that infrastructure problem, which is I don't even know how, we'll not get into that one right now because that's a huge one.
Right.
But can we get to getting people access in their homes that don't have it right now, which is very much a public safety issue. Like, yes, people need it for all the reasons Harold said. And really, if we can get folks to think about it as, if we get everyone to stay home, they're not spreading the virus. So isn't it a worthy investment to keep folks from spreading the virus? So the other resource that's out there right now are these free and discount offers from the internet service providers. They are valuable. So I want to make sure, yes, people should look at them. NDIA has a list. Go to digitalinclusion.org, right on the homepage, free.
And we'll put these links on this page so everyone watching this webcast will be able to see them.
Thank you. But there are challenges with that. As Harold noted, we can't rely upon the charity of these internet service providers. They are overwhelmed with the request. Charter in particular can't keep up. We're being told there's 4-hour waits to get to talk to someone to even request it. And then when you talk to someone, turns out you might not be eligible, because if you have bad debt with the companies, then they're not going to if you have debt or you've had service with them in the last 90 days, each of them have slightly different requirements. Comcast is the most flexible, but they also have some limitations. So these offers, yes, are really valuable. Everybody should go see if they can get anybody signed up. But there are limitations to them. They are not the final solution. They're just one valuable resource that is available now, and we should do that. But we also have to go after that subsidy to make sure that everybody else gets covered, because we all know now that this is not ending in a couple of weeks.
So Angela, just speak a little bit about National Digital Inclusion Alliance and some of the efforts that you have been undertaking for some years now, and what this crisis exacerbates or what it highlights of the work that you've been doing all the time.
Yeah, so NDIA, National Digital Inclusion Alliance, has been around for about 5 years. We represent organizations on the ground, so libraries, nonprofit organizations, housing authorities, local governments that are figuring out how to get internet into people's homes, providing public access internet, providing digital literacy training, and access to devices. So this work has been going on for 20 years. NDIA has only been here 5, and we are coordinating their work. And the reason we thought there was a need for that is because decisions were being made around federal policy and nobody knew these organizations existed. They didn't know how they were thinking about it. They didn't know the struggles. So that is now NDIA's purpose. We help those organizations to talk to each other and share best practices and challenges. And at the same time, we take all that to policymakers.
Excellent, thank you. Well, let's go to the ground, so to speak, and turn to Jeff Sterl and to Delano Squires in DC. Tell us just a little bit about what you both have been experiencing in your program. So, for example, Jeff, talk, if you don't mind, about the broadband office of the state of North Carolina and the specific focus on resources for people who may not be connected at this time. And you may need to unmute yourself. I've tried to unmute you several times there. Go ahead, Jeff.
Oh, okay, sure. Well, Drew, thanks for having us, and hope everyone is healthy. So our office works with communities and providers to enhance broadband access within unserved areas of our state. And we do that through a broadband grant program. So this year we have $15 million that we will distribute to internet service providers. The application deadline was last week. We extended it 2 weeks because of the current situation. We followed the USDA on that. And then we also have a technical assistance team that works in the field and works with usually community leaders to help with planning and mapping. We do a lot of data collection and analysis. We're trying to improve what the on-the-ground situation is in many of our communities. And then we also do a lot of work on the digital inclusion or digital literacy and equity side of things. We saw that as a key issue several years ago and have tried to dedicate more and more resources to it. And as Angela well knows, suddenly this, latter part of last year and early part of this year, that issue has just taken off. We've gotten a lot of requests to come and speak to folks, and there's been a lot of attention on that issue. So those are the things we're working on in specific to the current situation. Of course, we're in North Carolina, almost like every other state in the country. The schools are out for the next several weeks and likely longer. We're anticipating that and planning for that. People are all working from home. Most of the restaurants and bars, salons, and other places have been asked to close. Our parks here in our county have just all closed. So we're all home-based right now and working through that. The governor, Governor Cooper, convened a call of all internet service providers in the state on Friday. And Secretary Dokes, who is the Secretary of the Department of Information Technology, my boss, and I were on the call with the providers, talking through and encouraging them to do what they can to help. We acknowledge their commitment to the FCC pledge. Almost every one of them has committed to that. But we also asked them to do a little bit more, to look at creative solutions and ideas to help connect. First, let's try to get our students connected, and let's get those folks that maybe need some telehealth services connected, and then we can go from there. I mean, one of the things that we're struggling with, and as Angela alluded to, is that folks are experiencing symptoms, and we want them to stay in place, right? We don't want them out and about. So we were looking at some telehealth solutions. So we've been partnering with our sister agencies, Department of Health and Human Services, and with Department of Education, they're called the Department of Public Instruction here in North Carolina, to find those solutions. We're putting together an action plan that should be ready by the end of the day for tomorrow that the governor will vet, and then we'll start doing things like convening small groups of internet service providers to work through some of their ideas. Of course, we're looking like everyone else at buying hotspots to fill certain gaps, computers and devices, the Wi-Fi bus equipment so we can park them. Several community colleges have already stepped up and started blasting Wi-Fi into their parking lots so people can come and park. We've had several providers also do that. For example, we have a number of folks, smaller providers that, and there we go, working from home. We have a number of providers that are offering free Wi-Fi in their service area and in certain downtown locations.
Now, have you assembled a list? I understand there's a list, and we'll put this on the resource page as well.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for that. So what we did was we have assembled a list. It's on our webpage, ncbroadband.gov. There's a link to the COVID-19 broadband page, and we have an interactive map. People can go in, put in their address, see which providers are offering which services or low-cost offerings in their area.
Great.
So those are all the things we're working on. It's been busy.
Well, wonderful. We've got a couple questions here, and one I just want to pop in right now. This is from Lisa Neal Shaw in Maine, and she mentions the University of Maine System Network Maine is offering to enable guest Wi-Fi networks for 140 local schools that participate in the Maine Department of Education's Maine Learning Technology Initiative, and that the move would create open access Wi-Fi hotspots at schools where the signal extends outside of the building. And last point, positioning equipment near exterior walls and windows could further boost the signals. I'm just wondering from any of you, including you, Delano, and we'll get to you just now. Are there some? Is this kind of thing going on much with more expanded Wi-Fi? That's obviously part of the Keep America Connected pledge that FCC Chairman Ajit Pai has put forward. But what are you hearing about sort of efforts by anchor institutions or businesses to get more Wi-Fi out there as at least a kind of a kludge until we can get to something like Harold's talking about?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So let me start here. So I'm the program manager for Connect DC. We're the DC government's digital inclusion program, and my program is situated within the Office of the Chief Technology Officer, so the city's central IT agency. So we're hearing all different types of requests come through, different agencies, obviously public schools and public charter schools want to know what resources are available to help kids who don't have internet access at home. The good thing is that we've been in this area of work for quite some time, so there are options available. In the DC area, I think the lowest cost option is Comcast Internet Essentials, so that's $9.95 a month, with the option to purchase a laptop for $150. Angela made reference to it, but there are some restrictions, particularly for people who are current or recent internet subscribers from Comcast. But it's the most comprehensive program that I've seen to this point, comprehensive low-cost program. And at least in DC, their service covers the vast majority of the city. DC, thankfully, also owns its own public infrastructure. So libraries, recreation centers are all free to anyone, not just DC residents. But the problem, obviously, is that most mayors and governors are telling people to stay home. So I don't know that encouraging residents to leave home to sit, stand, park outside of those institutions is necessarily the best message at this point, particularly because all those places are closed. Our libraries are closed. Our recreation centers are closed.
So are they leaving their Wi-Fi signals on based on your experience? I mean, what are people understanding on the ground? Jeff, Lano, Angela?
So that's a good question. And it's actually something I'm glad you all raised it. I will ask that question. I just know that the facilities are closed. I'm not sure if the Wi-Fi networks are still operational, but that's definitely something I'm going to investigate here on the ground.
Okay. Angela, go ahead.
So it's scattered, and so because this is an unprecedented situation, the folks on the ground, in some places they have realized what's going on, and so those Wi-Fi networks are not only on for folks to get to from parking lots, but sometimes they're being boosted to get them further out into the parking lot and into the nearby neighborhoods. But in some places, they're not actually even on. So we need to increase awareness that yes, we want people to stay at home, but when they can't stay at home, there needs to be a huge variety of these parking lot access points, outside building access points, because we don't want everybody smushing into one small area where there's access, right? We need folks to spread out. I mean, it's the worst situation where you're asking them to go outside anyhow, which is really, can we do better? But if that's the terrible situation that we're in, okay, well then have as many places that are close to people as we can.
Right. Let me ask as well about data caps, right? Because this is an issue, and I believe in our coronavirus roundup this morning on Broadband Breakfast, we actually had a piece where AT&T's chief executive was talking about the bandwidth increased on their network that they've seen, and they've said, oh yeah, we won't have bandwidth caps on wired networks. They did not make that commitment on wireless network. And so I'm just wondering if all of you really have any thoughts on that, because that, it would seem to me, is a real potential hindrance to people accessing the broadband they need at this time if they're so concerned about their data cap, particularly on mobile devices. I know it's not what we would all like. We'd like people to have their fixed, connection in their homes, but the reality is a lot of people rely on their wireless. Harold, do you have any thoughts on that, on the data caps piece of it?
Yes, well, this is one of the reasons why, as a matter of policy, we've been very opposed to treating mobile networks as being the equivalent of an in-home wired or fixed wireless connection, because it's just not the same as we're seeing. Obviously, if you can't get anything else, then it is better than nothing. I will say that we are seeing the FCC and the wireless networks trying to step up with alternate sources of spectrum to try to handle the load, where we're seeing special temporary authorities being given. Dish is giving access to a bunch of its spectrum that hasn't been built out. So they're trying to expand their capacity, but there's still network hardware capacity that just can't be expanded out at the same rate. Obviously, if people are using their hotspots or using their mobile connections, they should continue to try to be reasonable in their uses, just because of the just because of the network constraints. And again, mobile networks, as far as I know, have not lifted their bandwidth caps, but really they should, especially because we do have people who are just dependent upon mobile. That's the situation we have now. That's not changing quickly. And even though I understand the limitations of those networks, but the fact is these networks are going to have to make do for the crisis, and that means that they should be lifting their bandwidth caps.
So when we talk, go ahead, Angela, go ahead.
Can I note that Sprint's the only mobile provider I'm aware of that has released the data caps for 1 month. It does not include hotspot devices. Hotspot devices, they're going to give a tiny bit more than, well, some amount more. And then, but for phones, they have released the data cap for a month. So that's a starting point, and all the other mobile providers should be following suit.
So a point here about the use of private. I guess we hear about the role that we're trying to play in releasing greater capacity to broadband, and so here's the thread I wanted to continue on. So in terms of the literature, as I understand it, Angela and others, on digital literacy, there are at least 3 issues that may keep people from being online. Putting this issue aside, right? It could be access, it could be cost, or it could be a lack of education, awareness, the value of it, right? And so access, we're not really talking about right now. Cost, we're definitely talking about. But I also don't want to ignore that other piece of education or knowledge or whatever it is exactly that is needed in order to get someone online. And I assume that's going to be an issue for a lot of the people we're trying to make sure are connected in the midst of the coronavirus. So Angela, could you speak to this and what we can make sure to do on this?
Yeah, so because we are all in crisis mode, we are looking first at that connectivity and we are looking at the devices. But the piece we can't miss is that, and we had been thinking of it as digital literacy, and that is still true. But the reality of how that will be provided to people is now via phone. So it's now more like tech support just to get someone functioning in the way they need to, not in the ways that they would all like to do, but can you just get by for now? Banking is a good example. How many banks close their branches? A lot. So you need to be able to do mobile banking, because the only banks that are open now are those with drive-throughs. Well, if there's not one near your house and you don't have a car, how are you going to do your banking? So teaching someone to do that mobile banking, it's essentially tech support over the phone.
How do you do it? And I want to ask Jeff and Delano this too. What's the kind of handhold? What's the mechanism for these people that are disconnected right now?
Yeah. So prior to COVID-19, we had a steady stream of classes, introductory classes. So for about almost 10 years, we partnered with a local nonprofit that provided digital literacy and tech training, everything from computer basics all the way up to advanced certifications. When that contract expired, we decided to do a pilot, starting with seniors, where we taught a couple of things. So we created our own curriculum, and we held workshops on how to use your smartphone. So we have a smartphone 101 class, we have a social media 101 workshop, and then we have a staying safe online 101, workshop. We're working on a fourth one, which actually should be the first, that sort of encapsulates all of the basics of using technology. So email, web browsing, now cloud, because a lot of computers, some more and more computers are coming without external drives where people can save, and fewer and fewer people that I see every day are using USB drives, and certainly no one uses floppy disks. So we think it's imperative that residents are equipped with at least the basics of how to access and use technology to promote a culture of use. In addition to that, one of the things that we did years ago was we created what we call a digital citizenship guide, which marries technology to the most important areas of people's lives. So we go through employment, education, health, housing, everyday use. Because Drew, and you mentioned this, some of the research at the time was saying that one of the big reasons people were not online was a lack of perceived relevance. So we wanted to address that by showing people how the things that they see as most important or hold most dear can be positively impacted by using technology. So obviously, once our mayor said no groupings over a certain amount, we couldn't do classes, partly because we actually do classes on a mobile tech lab. So we have a converted bookmobile, and we would go from location to location. But at this point, that vehicle is not in use, again, for obvious reasons. But I think once this epidemic passes or starts to level out, and people can resume somewhat normal activity, I hope that the crisis has provided an opportunity both for providers, practitioners, and policymakers to advocate for real and lasting change. Because it shouldn't take a global pandemic for people to say, you know what, internet access is pretty important, and not just for those who have the benefit of teleworking, but for everybody. So I hope there's increased interest in some of those classes across the country.
Jeff, let me ask you, what can you do right now for someone in North Carolina who calls? I mean, where would they even call? I mean, how do the people know where to call and what to call to say, I need to get online to get to my bank? Can NC Broadband help them with that?
Yeah, I mean, our office certainly is sourced there, and we've also worked with our local community leaders, our council of government leaders to provide that sort of resource and those outreach. There's a lot in our communities, and a network that's been built for that. Now, broadband is not a regulated entity or utility, I should say, in our state. So unless it's a customer complaint issue regarding your telephone, your voice service, then it would be the PUC. If it's beyond that, it would be the Attorney General's office. So a resource there.
But is there? I mean, would someone at the PUC answer their call now? I mean, is the PUC operating? What's the kind of emergency mode that people can, or any of you? Are there resources that you can direct people to that we can put on our website? Or again, this part of the challenge is we're reaching people who are not connected yet. So how do we get to them? And any thoughts on that?
So we get to them through the organizations that they've already have interactions with. So it's not the five of us getting to them, right? It's NDIA's affiliates. It's folks like like what Delano does and Delano's partners. It's Jeff's partners, right? It's the ones who are already providing services to seniors, for example, those who are providing services to low-income communities. So those who already have those relationships. So here's a great example. One of our affiliates is a nonprofit refurbisher, and they partnered with the school district. So as the school district was handing out food, right? So the school district had a system set up where cars drive into the school parking lot and they're handing out breakfast and lunch to each of the families. When they came into the parking lot, they were asked, the first thing they were asked was, are you in the food line, the technology line, or the food and technology line? And they divided the cars up into 3 lines. And then so depending upon which line you were in, if you're on one of the 2 lines that include technology, you're going home with a computer and a means to get on the internet.
Well, that is great. Where can people learn more about that if they know of a need, Angela?
So the challenge is that it's all very local, right? So I can't tell you, I can't send you to some national organization that's going to get you all those things. It has to be a local solution. So I mean, the low cost offers, right? Like that's on NDIA's website, but it has to be, if you're working on the computers and the devices and even the tech support, that's often who's doing that in your community. Ask around. If nobody's doing it in your community, then push. Somebody needs to step up and do it.
You also mentioned nonprofit technology refurbishers, and you know, are there other types of entities like that it can be enlisted or repurposed, if you will, to help in this crisis right now?
I'm not seeing any that are repurposing themselves. What NDIA is seeing is our affiliates doing that. So particularly the nonprofit refurbishers, they're saving lives. Like, hallelujah for these folks that are getting computers into people's homes. Hallelujah for what Delano is doing, helping people get signed up for their internet, because that is keeping people from going out, right? It's helping them be safe. It's helping the rest of their communities be safe. So when we think about who the heroes are in this crisis, Delano's one of our heroes.
We've gotten a comment here from Sean McLaughlin. 211 will refer folks. I can't vouch for the accuracy of that. I don't know that, but do any of you have any comments on that?
And again, it varies per location. So like Sean is up on it, right? He is certainly working with the 211 system to make sure they have the right information. Not everybody has a Sean. Right? So in places where they are working that, yes, it's a real resource. But if you're the person in your locality that can push to make that happen, push to make it happen.
Yeah.
And Drew,
Harold, what are you? Oh, go ahead, Delano.
So I was going to jump in because one of the, as you stated, one of the most difficult things about this line of work is that we are in one of the few fields where we don't have the luxury of just putting all of our information online.
Right.
So we have to find creative ways to reach people. So one of the ones that I found to be effective and certainly helpful at this time is the use of text messaging. So we have, sorry, hold on really good. My daughter set up her iPad with a.
This reminds me. One of our prior guests said the thing to success at this time is lower your expectations.
Yeah.
Make sure you don't say this is no good because of you know, someone coming into my office or your phone there. So go ahead, Delano. Continue.
So we started doing text messaging with residents probably about 4 or 5 years ago because we found the research showed that 9 in 10 Americans had a cell phone that could send or receive text. In that time, we've grown our list to almost 20,000 people. So now particularly for groups that aren't online and can't go out, we have a direct way to reach them. Obviously, you can do the same thing through email to the extent that some residents who don't have home internet are using certain apps like, neighborhood apps like Nextdoor or community listservs. You can put information there as well. But to me, the more direct the medium, the better. I agree with Angela. One of the most important parts of this digital inclusion ecosystem are the non-technical service providers of one sort or another, the folks that work with families, the folks in schools. The only thing is that we're at a point where everyone is discouraging people who don't need to be together. So basically anybody outside of your family from coming together. So I was willing to at least, whether it's me or my team, to go door to door in some of the neighborhoods where, you know, I know that home broadband adoption is low. I don't know that my you know, upper management will sign off on that idea, you know, for obvious reasons. But I think, as I said, I hope that when this storm passes, that it'll give practitioners in this field, you know, more ideas and more ways, and, you know, to reach people, to ensure that they're online. But text messaging is one that I would definitely recommend.
If I could just speak to that for just a second on the
Please.
policy side, but because one of the things that we're encountering as we try to push this through Congress is you still have members of Congress, and in particular, Senator McConnell and Senator Wicker, who do not believe that broadband is essential here. And do not believe that there needs to be anything in the stimulus with regard to broadband. And you know, this is, you know, I would say that if there are folks on the ground who are looking to help with the stimulus, and for organizations as well, to please, first of all, contact your members of Congress and let them know that maintaining a broadband connection is absolutely critical for people during this time, but also, you know, keep track of everything that folks are going through now, and because in the policy world, you know, 2 weeks is a lifetime ago, and nobody's going to remember next month what everybody here was scrambling to do, unless people, you know, keep a record and write it down, so that, you know, we can remind folks when these discussions come up again that we don't want to be caught short like this.
Right.
You know, I want to make sure, and Harold, if you'd comment on this, about what it is. I mean, we're trying to make sure that people are not cut off right now, but we're also trying to make sure we solve the problem going forward. And I'm wondering if you could just weigh the issue of sort of free and low cost plans that are out there versus what you've proposed. You know, why is it not enough just for some ISPs to offer free service to low income people during the interim? Why do we need this proposal right now that you're saying needs to be part of the stimulus that's being considered?
Well, first of all, it's absolutely essential that everybody in the country be connected. I mean, this is the way in which we're exchanging information in real time. This is the way in which you are accessing important resources. If you have children in school, you absolutely need to be connected up to this right away. If you are in any way able to do your job, you are in need of this. If you are trying to find one of the many jobs that has now opened up, where we need people to shift from one job to another for a couple of weeks, you need to do that through online listings. So this is absolutely critical for everybody. I will add, you know, if you want to be in touch with your grandparents, with your parents, with your brothers and sisters, you know, doing this visually is, you know, just so much better than being able to do it just over the phone or through texting. You know, people just find it amazingly reassuring. So for all of these reasons, it's critically important. And we can't depend on this patchwork of inconsistently applied programs where we don't know how well they'll be applied, how long they'll be applied. I mean, you know, people need to have certainty in their lives, and it needs to rely not just on, are you lucky enough to have a really big company that provides to your neighborhood? Are you in a neighborhood where they built out enough capacity to have it? You know, what do you do if you have Media One instead of Comcast, or, you know, somebody else, or you're in a market with a small ISP that can't afford to carry customers for free. And it's not their fault that they're a small ISP that can't afford to carry people for a month or two. Again, keep in mind, not everybody is a Comcast or a Charter. We're talking about for wireless ISPs in a lot of rural places, they're mom and pop businesses. We shouldn't be asking them to carry the burden. We should be helping them along as much as we're helping along the individual subscribers.
We certainly will have and want to have more ISPs on. We've had a couple. We want to have more. Let me just get 2 questions. I'm not sure if this is directed at us or just a point in general. Don't hog bandwidth if you don't need video. We did have a session today on Friday about some of the constraints that different providers are having, and I mentioned earlier the comment AT&T made about 100% greater increase on, I think it was Wi-Fi calling was the specifics. Here's one more point here from Lisa Neal Shaw. In Maine is an auto-reliant state. Our 260 public libraries leave their Wi-Fi on 24/7 as standard. I believe Vermont is doing the same. That's great to hear. Let me just open it up to additional comments on the issue of Wi-Fi and also hotspots, because I know, Angela, you wanted to talk about that and how hotspots are often talked about as a solution. But what is the limitation there, Angela?
So the limitation with the hotspots is that right now there are no hotspots to be purchased. The supply is completely depleted. It's
like the toilet paper of broadband.
It is exactly the toilet paper or the mask, right? Both of
or the mask.
All 3 of these are things everybody wants and nobody can have. So the issue with the hotspots is that they are one solution, but they are not the solution. We cannot put all of our eggs in the hotspot basket. The hotspots also rely upon mobile service. The cheapest hotspot service that a lot of folks go to is either Sprint or T-Mobile. Individually, because the merger has not happened, right? Individually, their service can be spotty. They're the least expensive for a reason, right? So in an area, it can look like you have coverage, but you go to a particular house and it may not be so good. So hotspots are not the full solution. Hotspots are one piece of the solution.
Let me come back to you, Jeff, on some of the issues that you're facing. How can people get access to hotspots, Wi-Fi? What are some of the tools that you have been using on the ground for that you're aware of that are happening in North Carolina?
Yeah, so like me, we're encouraging our libraries to up and leave their Wi-Fi on so people can access it. I agree with Delano that it's difficult to encourage people to leave. I mean, their homes and go out right now when a lot of healthcare professionals are saying stay in place. But some folks just don't have connectivity, and no matter if you had a hotspot or not, you're not going to be connected. You're so remote. So we're trying to encourage like what they call drive-ins now, where maybe you park for a short amount of time and use the Wi-Fi. The community colleges have opened this up. And a few other smaller internet service providers. I'd have to say that in our rural areas, our small internet service providers have really stepped up. They are doing a tremendous job because they live and work in those communities where they serve. So this is a big deal for their communities and for their friends and families. So a lot of them are providing free Wi-Fi from their locations and around towns. So we're seeing a good deal of folks stepping up. The other one is looking at the schools, and I think one of the things that we're going to propose that the governor advocate for at the federal level is for the FCC to lift some of the E-rate restrictions on schools providing internet service outside of the schoolhouse. Namely,
yes,
we could use maybe that fiber backbone to carry some wireless service. So we've seen that done previously. The school was not an E-rate recipient, so it didn't have the same restrictions as most of our schools do. But we have fiber to 99% of our schoolhouses in the state. So being able to use that outside and for students in the vicinity would be a great benefit to the community.
Great. Thank you for that perspective. We got a comment from Sabrina Roach, who says that hotspots are the single-ply toilet paper of internet access. Coverage is thin if you get your hands on some. So
yeah,
thank you for that.
I think we look at hotspots. Frankly, there's a great deal of talk around hotspots. And I think it's a good temporary solution. It's a Band-Aid. I mean, what we really want in North Carolina, what we've been working on in our office, is ubiquitous connectivity. That every location, every household in the state has internet service if they want it or if they choose. And so certainly hotspots are great. But then, the other issue is we're looking at that, and we can buy a bunch of hotspots, but then some kids, at least 500,000 households that we know of in North Carolina, don't have computers. So what do you do with a hotspot if you don't have a computer? And so then there's the digital learning piece of it. I mean, if you do have a hotspot in a computer, what are you doing with that tool? So be very smart about how we approach the current crisis and what we spend our money on. But certainly hotspots are a temporary solution, and we'll certainly consider them.
What are some other solutions that may exist that we need to be considering at this time? For any of you, you've got a few more minutes. We will stop right at 1 o'clock. But I would be very much interested in what your organizations are suggesting. So, like even if we can get beyond the hotspot Wi-Fi issue, and someone wants to provide broadband, a provider or a municipality wants to provide broadband on a temporary basis, free basis, low cost basis, can they get it out there? I mean, what are you hearing from your networks and your people about the people you work with about what other solutions there might be or are out there to get free and low cost access? Angela?
So in addition to the free and low cost plans and the federal subsidy that we don't have yet, but we very much need, there are also some creative solutions, people setting up mesh networks. NDIA has just started to look at, can we encourage folks to share their own bandwidth, sticking your router in your window? Yes, is against your terms of service. But should we be considering it? Maybe everything should be on the table.
Or loosening the terms of service, right? That goes back to the pledge, the Keep America Connected pledge. And one of the things I wanted to build on what you were saying, one of you was saying earlier, was that if these issues that Jeff was saying about the Lifeline rules, we actually discussed this on Wednesday, and on Thursday, Commissioner Carr last week on Broadband Breakfast Live Online said that everything was on the table. So those may be things that could be pushed for right now, even if they're not part of the stimulus, which we certainly would hope that they could be. But any further thoughts on those types of solutions?
Well, I think, the FCC could be doing a lot more. Jeff mentioned some of these restrictions that are in place that the FCC could certainly waive that limit participation in some of the program, limit what schools and libraries can do under E-rate, or that limit participation in the Lifeline program, where the FCC could certainly encourage carriers to participate more in the Lifeline program during the crisis. Congress is looking, or there have been some discussion around looking at what might be done through those vehicles. I do think that you have the problem of, will those get out more quickly? I do want to remind folks that you don't have to wait for the FCC to act on a global basis. If you're a school or a library or somebody that has a particular plan, you can apply for a specific waiver to staff, or for a special temporary authority if you're trying to use some frequencies that are open in your area. Those applications can sometimes be difficult, but I do know that FCC staff in crisis tend to be very helpful. They want to try to keep people connected, and so I would say that folks on the ground who are worried about FCC rules, are looking for some kind of waiver or exception, should call the FCC, should reach out to staff and see if they can't work something out.
Delano, what are some solutions that you're hearing of from your colleagues in the district?
So I know a couple of things that we have experimented with here in the district. One is doing hotspot rentals from the library. There were a handful of libraries that piloted that type of program. There are challenges with it. I mean, I think what's clear is that regardless of what the device is, there are going to be challenges. Whether you have in-home service with ISPs, there may be restrictions. Service may not be available in every area. Whether you have hotspots, mesh networks, because if you think the coverage from a hotspot, your own hotspot, can get spotty, and trying to rely on somebody else's can be difficult as well. And I know because I did that for about a year, where I used someone else's unsecured, SSID, a very long time ago. But but I think that one idea that I had a number of years ago was for something similar to I think the federal program that provides heating and energy assistance,
right?
LIHEAP.
The LIHEAP program, yeah.
Right. I think something like that, particularly on a local level, because I think one of the challenges that this epidemic has shown is that relying too much on the federal government, regardless of whose administration we're talking about, can put states in a very vulnerable position. And personally, I believe the closer the government is to the citizen, the more responsive it's going to be. So I'm not necessarily saying another federal program, but if a state or a city or a locale could set up an internet or technology assistance program that could serve people that are truly in need, that may be one way to go about this. Because at the end of the day, I think, and I'm fairly certain of this, we all see in-home access, internet access to the home as the gold standard. Everything else is trying to approach that in terms of capacity, bandwidth, and reliability. So to me, if there were options that people had that would give them assistance for purchase a connection, assuming that you have that option where you live, to me, that seems like the most, sustainable way forward.
So we've gotten one last comment, and I'm going to turn now to each of you for sort of final thoughts. But Sabrina Roach again asks, is there a work group of states opening public Wi-Fi at various institutions for drive-in strategy? And she also asks if this North Carolina resource can be put online. And if you've got a link, Jeff, we'd be happy to link to it for this page, for this webcast that people will be on. Let's just go with the way we started. Harold, Angela, Jeff, and Delano, just some final thoughts in our last 3 minutes before we conclude. So go ahead, Harold. What is most important for people to take from this discussion?
Well, I think what's most important for people to take from this discussion is there are resources out there. People should be looking out for their communities. There are resources at every level, including individuals, what you can offer. If nothing else, there is calling your local representative, your local mayor, your local member of Congress, and letting them know that broadband is an absolute necessity, and we have a responsibility to make sure that everybody is connected in the crisis.
Great, thank you. Angela.
On NDIA's website is a link for who we are, and in that is a sublink then for our affiliates. So if you don't know who's doing digital inclusion work in your area, it's not a fully complete list because it's just who we know is doing the work. But you might find somebody you didn't know was doing digital inclusion work. So I encourage you to reach out to them. If there's nobody on the list, talk to libraries, talk to local community-based organizations that are serving seniors and serving low-income populations, because there could be folks who are in a place to do something, but don't know what that thing is and could use some help getting there.
Okay, Jeff, final thoughts from you.
I mean, this situation just highlights in such a tangible, visceral way the critical need for connectivity. And so, you know, you know, in one sense, if we're looking at silver linings, this is a learning moment for a lot of our policymakers, and I hope that we walk away with this, and it's not, you know, it's forgotten in a couple of weeks, but it's something that we can continue to work on in the months ahead. So if we ever face this type of situation again, we face it with you know, with much more manageable connectivity for everyone. So thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Delano, final thoughts that you have for our listeners.
Yeah, well, I see this crisis for what it is, and I hope we find the opportunities within this crisis to not just advocate for greater broadband adoption, but to really encourage people to work within their local communities. I think this pandemic can help us have a very real life exercise in civics, to show that local communities oftentimes serve themselves much better than far away external entities, even bureaucrats. And I say that as someone who works for the government. And I hope once this pandemic dies down and once we resume, you know, our normal lives, that the people who previously were not focusing on the digital divide continue to see why we do the work that we do and continue to support it. So
great. Well, thank you so much to each of you, Harold, Angela, Jeff, and Delano, for joining us. And thank you to each of you for watching us. Tomorrow we'll be back, as we are every Monday through Friday of March, and we'll be talking with journalists who are covering broadband and the coronavirus. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you, Drew.
Thank you.